You probably might guess I'm not a scientist and I haven't got any graphs, and I'm certainly not an expert. All I can tell you is the 16-year journey which I've had investigating the Suffolk landscape, and what I thought was of a task of self-discovery, things became crystallised, and it became apparent to me that something more beautiful was possibly revealing itself to me and to others. I started this in 1986. I finished it in 2004. It took so long because I'm my own worst critic. I didn't start out with any end product in mind. This book here has got a really beautiful sentence at the start, which I'm just going to plagiarise. It says, the outcome of this development is therefore not some carefully groomed, fixed personal agenda. It's as much a surprise to me as it will be to the reader. I didn't start this thinking that there was a heptagon in the landscape about 11 miles across. There's a few caveats. It's the first time I've done this presentation. I've spoken about my research a couple of times informally, but nothing as grand as this. The slides are very text heavy. You don't have to read them. I do. We haven't all got brains the size of a planet, like other people. There's a lot of information to get through, so some of it's a bit sketchy, some of it's a bit breaky. There'll be some opportunities to maybe ask some questions to help me orient my thinking as we change tack, and I'll ask. Yeah, the first slide here is probably a little bit tongue-in-cheek, really. I got rather tired of reading and hearing everything about the west of the country, and as beautiful as it is, those things are not going to interest us now at all. All we're interested in right now is what's going on beneath your feet here in Suffolk, a 6-mile circle from the great Abbey at Bury. So we may well mention the word Avebury or Stonehenge, but we're certainly not going to be talking about them or looking anywhere other than what's lying dormant in Suffolk. An overview, a quick prelude of where we're going to be going over the next hour and 5 minutes. The origins of the landscape heptagon actually emanated from a visit from a leading dowser with Fountain. We'll have a look at the sacred dimensions of it and how it relates to other discoveries, particularly by David Furlong. We'll have a look at the Terrestrial Zodiac of Bury, some ancient trackways. I believe I found a spot where all three ancient trackways converge at the crowning point of the heptagon. We'll have a look at some of the sacred sites. I haven't got time to talk about them all. Brief mention of the Bury Bible, just because it links in with some of the symbolism and it's quite cool. Herbert Hudson's Ancient Sun Alignments, he did a great paper in 1932, and they intersect with some of the sacred sites. Star-ground correlation and some of the implications. There's 8 slides before we get serious, and I think those 8 slides are a little bit like, to use Mark's analogy, they're a little bit like the straws on the game Kaplunk from 1970, where you have to pull them out gradually before the marbles settle and we can orient our thinking on the same plane. So there's 8 slides which are a bit, where's he going with this? Bear with me, we'll get there in the end. So today we appreciate that individual ancient sites and collective structures carried profound psychological meaning to our prehistoric ancestors. Round barrows served to symbolically represent the wider landscape and architectural form, and they were believed to represent the centre of the world or even the cosmos. These great monuments were built to influence the way people experienced the landscape, and how they were configured served to structure the ways that people understood both space and time. Intuition was this culture's guiding principle, which was based on a symbiotic relationship with the environment, which for them was still very much intact, miles away from our own linear, mechanistic thought processes. And this open consciousness was in full appreciation of and in communion with the natural environmental cycles and workings of the cosmos. Consciously planned artifacts amongst the landscape, inspired largely from the geometry of natural forms, frequently became imbued with magical powers, the reconciliation between the human spirit and the earth. So the context for me was the Fountain Group, 1987. The Fountain Group started in 1981 in Brighton, taking place in 20 countries. In Brighton, it was based on the concept of like communities, people suffer from disease, and by the collective action of tuning in one's thoughts to an agreed focal point, one's own community, it was possible to achieve positive outcomes for that community. And they'd noticed that by concentrating onto the fountain there at a set time, civic awareness blossomed, violence reduced, and there was a general beneficial ambience. And the fountain group in Bury, which I was a member of, the focal point was the crypt in the Bury Abbey. And Janet Tinton visited in 1987, and these are the notes which came from that visit, which sparked my own area of interest, really, and self-development. There seems to be a star shape around Bury. The star has 13 points, though one may be the centre. The star is around this matrix and also within it. Now, at that time, Colin Bloy was dousing some Templar crosses, and there was Chris Street's book Earth Stars in 1990. But for me, I'm not saying other people weren't doing it, but for me in the sleepy suburbs where I lived, there wasn't too many people talking about stars and shapes on the landscape. There's a fantastic book, though, John Michel's City of Revelation. I was heavily into that at the time, and I guess my awareness of that book and the New Jerusalem Groundplan, which I'll go at in a minute, and he speaks about 12 gates and 7 hills. That was the catalyst, really, for my own exploration. So the ground plan of a temple, well, the world is created by God by means of number, and that occurs frequently throughout the creation myths of many traditional stories of ancient civilizations. The study of ancient geodesy concerned the traditional dimensions of the earth and units of measure embodied in the sacred canon of cosmology, enshrined in the laws, customs, and rituals of everyday life, and it was considered to be a cherished possession by those who were aware of its beauty. The functions and attributes of the temple are numerous and can be summarized in the ancient concept of the temple as a living organism. The body being that of God, the macrocosm, its form and dimensions determined by reference to the structure of the heavens. The New Jerusalem with its 12 pearls and 7 stars was revealed to St. John in Revelation 21. And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven. And in that book, St. John delineates the parameters of the city with the temple at its centre, basing his model on the sacred geometrical symbol, the circle contained within the square. That, for me, is a meditation in itself. You can probably see the squared circle made out of the relative circles of the earth and the moon, constructed from the 3-4-5 triangle. The New Jerusalem, its perimeter was 6 miles. The circumference was 6.666. Try saying this if you've got a lisp. 6,666,000 megalithic yards square, and it was the solar capital. The number of absolute positive energy, force and will, 666, which most people don't probably attribute to something cosmic, but probably Revelation and the beast. But we'll come back to that number and to that ground plan later, because it transpires that the heptagon and landscape embodies that entirely. So like the perfect temple, the canon of measure was considered to be a living archetype, linked to the gods by whom it was first revealed. So the idea of the New Jerusalem ground plan, with the numbers 12 and 7, remember the 12-pointed star that was doused around Bury, quite a few people were thinking, is it energetic? Is it on the land? So mindful of those insights, I was drawn repeatedly to a place north of Bury St Edmunds called Sevenhills. I thought it was ironic that we've got an illustration, the 12 gates and the 7 hills, and there's a place due north above the Bury Abbey called the 7 Hills, and I thought, it's probably a bit too simple. But we was in a meditation, and there was 2 place names which were given, and for, I'd say, about 3 or 4 years, quite a few people thought that those place names related to the 12 points, and it actually transpired that they were inherent in the geometry of the heptagon, similar to the one that you can see on the left, integral in the diagram. This, the process from the meditation to this was like a good few years. I didn't just sit there with a map and a compass, fevering away like a madman trying to make something. It just very generally sort of unfolded. This is a lovely quote here. Mathematical geomancy does not mean the imposition of abstract designs upon the landscape, but the detection and enhancement of the geometry that is already concealed within it. So what was already concealed within the landscape? Well, from Sevenhills, which is north above the Bury Abbey, and the two place names that I'd mentioned, incidentally, the distance between Sevenhills, Cuckoo Hill, Sevenhills and Bailey Pool Bridge is exactly 10,800 megalithic yards. We'll come to that later. But when you go around anti-clockwise, there's Cuckoo Hill, which is a tumuli and has an unusual north-south tapering earthen bank, 150 metres long. Below that, Hearse Wood. It's an ancient woodland, been there for about 1,300 years at least, and it's on a pre-existing earthwork, and it marks Aquarius in the Bury Zodiac. Below that, Hawk's Leys, that's the centre of the Bury Terrestrial Zodiac. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Bury Terrestrial Zodiac, but that's the centre point. It's the highest point in Suffolk. We'll talk about that in a minute. Cockfield Church, and then Hearse Church. The only thing that bothered me was Bailey Pool Bridge. There wasn't anything there at all. It was just a bridge. It didn't really fit. I kind of like left it and ignored it for a bit, going with all the easy wins, having a look at all the other places first. Also, I found out this a couple of years later. I mean, this was 10 years later after my first thoughts around the landscape. It's got a red number 1 because there were 6 moments throughout my research that I thought, you know, there's something here. So the red numbers relate to moments when I went, wow. And this was one of them. The Institute of Geomantic Research published this paper in 1975 called The Landscape Geometry of Southern Britain. The only copy that I've found is in the University Library at Cambridge. But anyway, Michael says, it's significant that heptagons in the landscape are said to occur frequently at other zodiacs in the country. Northampstead, Glastonbury and Ongar, with each terrestrial zodiac being sighted in the neighbourhood of a heptagon. That was rather affirming, to say the least. There's a nice quote there by Nigel Pennock. Each time a geometrical form is produced, an expression of the universal oneness is made. It is at once unique in time and place, and also timeless and transcendent, representing the particular and the universal. So remember that point at Bailey Pool Bridge where there was nothing. It turned out that there was almost everything. Grimstone End is the name of the village which the point at Bailey Pool Bridge is sited in. This innocuous location I soon discovered had been described by Norman Scarfe in his book on the Suffolk landscape as one of the most archaeologically exciting in Suffolk. It was a major centre in later times for the Romans and was described by him as being in a prime position for controlling the Pedder's Way. The word Bailey has at its origins in post-Neolithic construction. Prehistoric mounds in Anglo-Saxon times were later used for siting castles and had added onto them stone walls or earthen banks, which became known as the Bailey. In Anglo-Saxon times, it was common for earthworks whose origins are unknown to be called grime or grim, an epithet of the devil, such as in the case of the flint mines at Grimes Graves in Norfolk, and his name probably means the devil's holes or the diggings of the devil. I put the references in there just so people can say that it's not me making this up, and I know that I've sat in the crowd for many years, and the odd name, the odd quote can sometimes lead one on. The place name Grimstone is also without doubt a survival of the Norse Grimr, a synonym of Odin, from Woden, the all-pervading power of the Godhead. Bailey Pool Bridge, I found out as well, is just 300 feet away from a suspected long mound. At 60 metres in length, it's also joined by a tumuli. There's only one other in the whole of Suffolk, in approximately 1,500 square mile. Two other known oval barrows are considerably smaller at 28 and 30 metres. Over half of the British earthen long barrows, a style of grave first used after 4000 BC, are between 30 and 60 metres in length. Now, I'm not saying there had to be a long mound there, but as far as cosmic pin the tail on the donkey goes, out of 1,500 square miles to go like that and for it to be on the point of the heptagon where there was, I didn't think, a great deal. I thought that was quite impressive. I also found an OS map in the Bury Records Office, which has now been withdrawn from 1904, but I've got a photocopy here in case people think I'm making it up. On the crossing point at Baileypool Bridge, alongside a variety of other very detailed archaeological notes, it said sarsen stone hewn. I can only conclude, given the name Grimstone, that this meticulously recorded stone at Grimstone was Odin's stone, and has long since been destroyed, as with the stone of Odin at Orkney, which was removed by a local farmer in 1814 as too many people came to see it. He was well justified then. The white blob is where the stone was marked on the map. It's interesting how it aligns perfectly with the long mound there and the tumuli. And don't forget, we're only looking at this purely by the geometry of the heptagon. To our ancestors, the number 7 dominated all their symbols and myths of the time. The tribes followed the 7 stars of the Great Bear around the pole of their territory, spun stories out of wanderings of the 7-tone reed pipe. 7 stages completed the mystery rites of initiation, which took place underground within the womb of the goddess. There's an awful lot in the book about the symbolism of the number 7, but haven't got time for it all, obviously. The geometry of the number 7 is also described as being the most precious of all the secrets known to the temple geometers, representing the 7 heavenly bodies in Neolithic times. Now, the heptagon is quite an unusual and difficult shape to construct, and is more commonly formed following the fixing of the apex point being Sevenhills. The distance between Sevenhills and Baileypool Bridge, Sevenhills and Cuckoo Hill, sorry if it's a bit fuzzy, as I say, it's 10,800 metres. The heptagon's resulting geometry can also be simplified, if it's created like this, by the process of including a rectangle, and that may account for the reduced proportions present. As you can see in the middle, it's the points of the heptagon here are directly below. So mindful of that, mindful of this geometric application, I thought let's have a look to see what course the crowning circle centred on the apex point at Sevenhills would take. I felt it was possible that the architects behind the Sevenhills heptagon, as I often called it, may have employed a similar construction methodology. Therefore, it was reasonable to expect to find along this top circle circumference other ritual markers and ancient sites in the landscape to both aid construction and in adoration of the temple's ground plan. It's got a red number 3 because there was quite a few. If you could just flick through these, Mark, please. So starting at the bottom left, we've got Cuckoo Hill, just above it, the Ignald Way. Then there's a subcircular crop mark. Above that, there's a round barrow, 34 metres wide. Icklingham Church, 14th century. Dead Man's Grave, a tumulus. 25-metre round barrow. There's a whole host of things at the top here. There's Bird's Hearse, a thicket on the hill, Lambert Hill, Barrow Hill, London Hill. There's Thetford Church, Thetford Castle, which has been an ancient site from prehistoric times to the Iron Age. There's another Sevenhills Barrow cluster. Great First Hill, an ancient Iron Age site. Another additional round barrow with no archaeological information that I could see. There's a level tumulus. The Pedder's Way actually tracks the circumference for 2.5 miles, like bang on. New Grove, ancient woodland, and then we're back to Baileypool Bridge. I'll just have some water. I don't know if there's any questions. Quick, easy wins would be good. No?
Zodiac. You got pictures of that?
Have I got pictures of?
The Zodiac and how it fits with the heptagon?
I haven't, no. I mean, I've drawn it on a map.
I've got a layout, so I can show you guys.
I mean, yeah, I've got the Zodiac and I've got the heptagon, but I haven't got quite how they dovetail. Crudely, if the heptagon's here, and this microphone is a figure 8 of Escapeces, they sort of overlap. You know, they overlap. It's probably about the best.
They made it at the same time.
I don't know. Sorry.
You know, classically, culturally, the 7 spins of the tetra's shadow indicates a kind of cubic map. But inside that, to look for something that's pent. And that was both Cherokee and Ofana, the sigil of truth. 7 spins outside and 5 inside at the angle. So we might look for something pentagonal in the heart.
Right.
Thought.
Okay. Along with those other thoughts to follow. Thank you. I've worked on 2.722 feet. 2.722 feet.
It's 1 cubit, the elbow to the tip of your finger plus 1 English foot.
But the point of the City of Revelation books there was that there was a golden ratio cascade between multiple early measures. So the geometry of the ratio of the pyramid image makes it figure out they fit a cascade geometrically. Very deep.
I'll touch upon some of that in the book, but...
Can we leave the questions?
Yep, sure.
Because we're going to upset the DVD recording.
Okay, sorry. Yep.
That bit out.
Yeah, we'll just have a look at the Groundplan now. This was Sir Norman Lockyer's alignment, which he published in 1922. Stonehenge, Gravely Castle Hill Fort, and Old Sarum Hill Fort, 9.656 kilometres. It was fairly close, I thought, to the size of the heptagon, but things got better. David Furlong, who kindly wrote the foreword for my book, he discovered 2 circles at Avebury with a radius of 9,576 metres. And after about 15 years, Trident Map Service in Norwich confirmed that the circle contained in the heptagon was only 4 metres out from David Furlong's, 0.02%. I thought that wasn't bad. And this is David Furlong's work. He kindly let me just cut and paste. So the circumference of the circle of the heptagon, as in the circle of his sites as well, is 1/666th ratio of the Earth's circumference. So if the metre from the equator to the pole along the Paris meridian, it was intended to equal 1/10,000,000th part of the distance. You divide the equatorial circumference of the Earth by the circumference of the heptagon, and you get 666. Which you may remember from the New Jerusalem Groundplan. To attribute the forces of evil to any number is absurd. No thing, least of all any number, is either positive or negative in itself. Every natural principle has its own rightful place in the universe, and its influence can be disposed in either direction. Naturally, when I was going about this and I was saying, yeah, and it's 666, at that point people say, you seriously are deluded. Because they start thinking about all manner of things. St. John in using the number 666 was connected into Judaic mysticism, which used number symbolism allegorically. He was conveying a message that could be understood by those initiated in the tradition. It's now more commonly believed that St. John intended the beast to signify the Roman Emperor Nero. In Hebrew, numerologically, the letters Caesar have the value of 666. And it's also possible, Furlong continues, that the number 666 was a sideways swipe at the Roman authorities who were responsible for the crucifixion. Their first 6 numerals add up to 666. I'm probably not going to read all the 6s, but you can see the speed of the Earth around the Sun is inherently related. The distance between the Earth and the Moon, the diameter of the Moon, 6 by 6 by 60. The New Jerusalem, was already mentioned, measured 31,680,000 feet round. The circle contained within a square of the perimeter was 316 feet, and it corresponds to the Bluestone Circle at Stonehenge, which has an area of 666 megalithic yards. And the length of the rectangle, which Blythbond believed contained the original area of the site of Glastonbury Abbey and the Bury Abbey Groundplan, was built on an exact model. It was 666 feet, and its area was 66,600 square cubits. Little breather, change of tack. Landscape temples are not merely a symbol of cosmic order. They've been described as an instrument designed to fuse on Earth the spirit of the sun with the spirit of the moon. These two numbers are embodied within the heptagon's design and construction. We're just going to have a little look now at the Michael line. There's a picture of the heptagon with the Michael ley line going right through the centre. Have a brief look at the Abbey and Sagittarius in the Zodiac. Our solar system is about 23,000 light years from the galactic centre, 1 light year being equivalent to 10 trillion kilometres. This location was named to our ancestors. I see there's a copy of that book on DVD on the table. Not only was it known, it's also believed to have been highlighted and pointed out by the ancient sages who crafted their lore within the universal astrological symbols and archetypes enshrined in the Zodiac. Two of the main constellations have arrows in their design and sit side by side, Sagittarius and Scorpio, and both point to the exact spot in the cosmos where the galactic centre is known presently to be, at Sagittarius A. The heart of the galaxy was viewed by our ancestors as the centre of matter and energy. It was a cosmic wellspring giving birth to all matter in the galaxy. This wellspring, the galactic centre, is estimated to be about 1 million times that of the Sun, making it the largest celestial object in the galaxy. Well, the orchestrators behind the heptagon continued with this wisdom tradition of these ancient sages through their own hermetic practices. Sagittarius was located right at the centre by being placed in the centre of the landscape heptagon, with the great Abbey situated on Sagittarius's hind leg. That's redrawn on the NOAS map by me, but it's obviously taken from Burgess's original work on the Zodiac in '79, which I believe Claire... Yep, great, well done. This is just a little sideline, but it's interesting. The Bury Bible, I don't know how many of you are aware of the Bury Bible or have seen it. Anyone? No. I believe it's now at Corpus Christi, Cambridge, or the Fitzwilliam. The Bury Bible was commissioned by the Sacred Harvey for the Abbey and was illuminated by the Master Hugo. He was a secular artist, and he was likened in stature and importance to Michelangelo. The Bible's completion took 2 years, and its construction included 350 calf skins, which is quite incredible. I've seen it, and it really is amazing. I studied graphic design and illustration when I was a lot younger, and even today the illustrations are incredibly detailed. They're very vibrant and technically masterful. The full-page illustrations are in a Romanesque style with Byzantine influences. Of the original 12 illustrations, only 6 exist, and they're accompanied by 42 historiated initials. Now, the first page in this rich illuminated work is the letter F at the start of Jerome's prologue. It's almost 2 feet in height, and in this splendidly illustrated page, right at the top left-hand corner, is that symbol there, the Sagittarius in the circle. The point which naturally guides your eye into this great majestic volume, one is confronted with the symbol of that centaur. And I just found it interesting that out of all the noble Christian iconic imagery that Master Hugo could have used, I find the use of this mythological and astrological figure intriguing, an esoteric tact of the initiate. I don't know if any of you have heard of Herbert Hudson and his ancient sun alignments. He published his paper in 1932. I've traced the lines on the map, and I've tried to dovetail them with the heptagon. He reported numerous earthworks and markstones which bared a name relating to the sun and which formed great alignments, largely orientated to the rising or setting sun at midsummer solstice on the longest day. And this is like here in Suffolk. Hudson thought it possible that these Suffolk solar alignments were possibly the finest examples in the whole of Great Britain. 1-0 to Suffolk. Hudson discovered the frequent use of ancient place names, Bel, the Celto-British name for Belus, the Babylonian sun god, the Norse god of light, and other solar symbols, including the eagle. Don't forget, it goes right through Hearse wood, which is the eagle in the Zodiac, and was convinced that such evidence indicated a former presence by our ancient ancestors of solar worship. occurring on the very spot where previous solar deities had been honoured. Such locations were located systematically so they would create and conform to great astronomic alignments, set out across the landscape forming a network of solar lines. The earthwork at Hearse Wood, which we'll have a look at, is on this midsummer sunset line and is the eagle, symbolising Aquarius in the Bury Zodiac, with the church at neighbouring Little Saxon beside Hearse Wood on the St Mary ley line. In September, I'm leading a field trip to Hearse Wood. I think, John, you might have some details about that if people are interested. In the inventory of the county's wildlife sites, Hearse Wood is described as a large, unusual and extremely ancient wood, dating back to Anglo-Saxon times. You can see it at the bottom there, underneath the bird. Its name probably derives from the Old English Hearse, meaning a grove on a hill. The Saxon map of 1729 shows that the woods extended down to a stream, a rare feature in an ancient wood. Rich ground flora contains yellow archangel, purple orchid, pignut, dog's mercury, hairy St John's wort. You can see there's some very ancient flowers there. It's such an enigmatic spot. It's Suffolk's sleeping gem, I think. It's a fantastic place. Symbolically, the great wheel-shaped woodland at Great Saxham, it's about 650 metres across, quite large. It's very unusual and automatically draws one in by the very nature of its curious design. The sun itself is a universal symbol of the deity, also often represented in the form of a great wheel. And the symbol of the wheel crosses beside Christian symbolism, of course, the symbol of the four world corners and the four solstices. Obviously the equinoxes with that. Representing the four world axis, the middle of the wheel representing the North Pole. When the wheel turns, the abodes of the gods, the eternal polar stars, move also, heralding the end of a cosmic age. And the custom of rolling a burning wheel down a hill, as carried out during celebrated solar fire burning festivals, uses the wheel to symbolise the sun, obviously especially appropriate when this practice is performed on Midsummer's Day. There's a photograph of the ditch there. I was down at the archaeological unit and asked about the style of ancient earthwork that the woodland had been built on, and they just felt that, you know, ancient woods occasionally are incorporated into much earlier earthwork, such as castle mottes and round barrows. So, you know, there's been something there for at least 1400 years, I suspect far, far earlier. It's a bit strange, really, me trying to talk about John Dee after Dan's mentioned him. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, the famed alchemist and Queen's physician, he'd also observed the zodiacal figures in the landscape. I know that some people have a bit of a love-hate relationship with zodiacs, but having lived in Hearse, the heart of Virgo, for over 10 years, I love them. In his transcript of the angelic actions in 1582, he makes reference to the landscape effigies. I'm not going to attempt to read it because my old English is poor, but I'd like to think that you can see. We all done? Yeah. I'm sorry? No, it's there, that the quote, the stars which agree with their reproductions on the ground. Thus is astrologically and astronomically carefully and exactly married and measured in a scientific reconstruction of the heavens, which shows that the ancients understood all which today the learned know to be facts. This is the large ovoid granite boulder, which is now on the green at Hearse, and as Shirley Toulson and Burgess thought, once marked the centre of the terrestrial zodiac. It's quite a large stone. It's quite out of character. It is said that it was dragged to its current resting place downstream in 1713 to celebrate the peace of Utrecht in the War of the Spanish Succession. There's also a reference to the Hearse stone in the East Anglian in 1856. It was brought to light over a century ago as well from a clay pit at the top of Hearse Hill, where it was conveyed on a strong sleigh to its current place. However, I'm with Shirley Toulson, and I believe that it was definitely at the centre of the zodiac, as I'll just explain. Bury's zodiac fits roughly within two interlocking circles which form a visca pieces, the centre of which falls on an ancient woodland called Longgrove in Leys farm in Reed. The name Reed may derive from Rode, the old geomantic unit of measure, and at 420 feet, Reed is the highest point in the whole of Suffolk, truly the most perfect place from which to survey the zodiac. The ancient woodland supports a diverse array of ground flora, including a number of quite rare species such as wood millet, pendulous sage and wood anemone. Longgrove is presently a V shape, which in Peruvian legends represented the navel of the world, the centre, the hub of the universe. Small woodlands with names associated with the Ley or Lee, they also mark the centre of terrestrial zodiacs at Northampton and Ongar. The close relation and proximity of such a large stone, a roughly cubic stone, fits perfectly with an evocative and hermetic vision, as in keeping with the Templar tradition, whose churches are often circular in design with cubic altars hewn of stone placed in the centre. It's clear, it has been previously illustrated, that our ancestors felt a great spiritual need to both record and honour the wonderful cosmological order that underlined the metaphysical reality of their external world. This expressed itself in the hermetic vision, as above, so below, so majestically demonstrated in the discovery by Beauval and Gilbert on the Giza Plateau, the often cited star correlation theory, where the pyramids in the River Nile were designed to mirror the stars in Orion's belt and the Milky Way. I'm sure a lot of you have seen that before. I know Andrew Collins believes that the pyramids are the stars of Cygnus, but either way, it's beautiful symmetry. There's a reason why we're talking about it as well. This belief that our ancestors consciously mirrored the heavens within the ground plans of their temples was recently reinforced by mainstream sources. In 2004, the Journal of British Archaeology reported the investigations around Thornborough, where it was acknowledged that the plan of the three henges there overlooking the river were designed to be an exact mirror of the three main setting stars in the belt of the constellation of Orion. I think if you'd have mentioned that to them 10 years ago, they wouldn't have been quite so receptive. That's a photocopy there if anybody wants to have a look from the original article. These discoveries facilitate an opportunity to truly attune one's consciousness to the notion of a unified and arcane landscape, a mystical union between the heaven and earth. And the Babylonians erected 7-tiered ziggurats, pyramid temples, with each tier dedicated to one of the 7 major planets, symbolic of the house of the 7 bonds of heaven and earth. And it was the apex of these pyramid-shaped temples that symbolized the pole star, which has been a continual central preoccupation for cultures across the millennium. Interestingly, there's 7 pole stars in the course of a great year, a great processional cycle, 25,920 years. The 7-tiered temples symbolize the northern hemisphere, and the apex being the pole star, and the base the equator, which the Greeks later emulated in their own geographical thinking, dividing the area between the pole and the equator into 7 zones. It is in keeping, then, that any interpretation of such an ancient cosmological worldview would mirror on the landscape this same social schema, with 7 hills at the apex, reflecting the then pole star, Thuban, and the constellation of Draco. Thuban, Arabic for dragon, it was circumpolar, which meant that the star never set for over about 2,500 years. So Thuban remained a permanent northern marker between 4000 and 2000 BC and a little bit after, and as such gave men their first sense of orientation in the starry night. It was commonly referred to amongst cultures as the gate of heaven or hub of the cosmos. And it was seen to control the turning of the cosmic wheel as all other stars danced, rotating around this central position. The early astronomers at this time learnt by Thuban to orient themselves, and that first principle of bearing onto something. So mindful of these practices and ideology, it was impossible not to be struck by this symbolism when viewing the ground plan of the Sevenhills heptagon against a map of the night sky. So we've got the Sevenhills heptagon at the top, on the left-hand side, in its most northerly position, representing the constellation Draco. The position of Taurus was to the bottom left, exactly where Hawke's Lay would be. Beside Taurus in the sky map of the heavens, it's sitting exactly underneath the constellation Auriga. At a distance of 42 light years away, Auriga contains one of the sky's most famous double stars, Capella, one being 50 times more luminous than that of the Sun. Incidentally, the White Uffington horse, John North believes, is a bull and not a horse, and the horns on the head are emblematic of Hyades. I mean, I'm not saying it's a perfect fit, but as woodland and stars go, bearing in mind Auriga's the charioteer, the great wheel, I'd say it wasn't a bad copy. I can't begin to understand or envision the processes which keep it as a permanent feature in the landscape. I guess it's like the imperviousness of place names, which can remain for thousands of years, and possibly once the intention has been sited onto the land, maybe within some aspect in the morphogenetics grid, its shape and form has been retained for eons. Sevenhills group of tumuli in the parish of Little Livermere sits at the apex of the heptagon. Barrows in tumuli once sited have created permanent surveying points for our ancestors while singling out significant locations. Far from being solely for burial purposes, a survey of 350 barrows in Wiltshire found as many as 35% contain no skeletons, no artefacts or no remains. It was their considered location, therefore, that must be seen as the reason for being, their primary motivation indicative of extensive landscape planning, born out of a need to honour the wondrous cosmological order that underlies the metaphysical reality of the external world. Today, this need and form of expression has largely been eroded, leaving modern man and woman cloaked by the drapery of commercial globalisation, bereft of any intimate sense of any spiritual sacred connection with the earth, apart from everyone here. If Sevenhills is as truly significant as I am suggesting, being the crowning pinnacle of this terrestrial heptagon, then I thought it was reasonable to expect that it would have been located so that it could have been readily and easily accessed, benefiting from maximum human and spiritual engagement. That's my last red number. You can see the Ignilled Way on the top left there, and the dotted trackway going from the bottom right up to the centre is a pudding stone track, which we'll talk about. To the far right, you've got the course of the Peddar's Way. I found a map, 1629, and it shows Peddar's Way going right through the crowning point at Sevenhills. So the Ignilled Way, briefly, we'll just have a look at these trackways, is a wide swathe of meandering yet directional pathways which has its origins in both age-old animal migration routes and spiritual processional pathways which were in use as long ago as 8000 BC. It connected two of the largest centres of Neolithic occupation in Britain, namely Thetford and the Little Leys Basin at Avebury in Wiltshire. The lower and upper Ignilled Ways follow a natural chalk ridge which runs from North Norfolk towards Buckinghamshire, running along this chalk ridge and the East Anglian Heights all the way to the Marlborough Downs. It has been created on what can be rightly called the oldest road in Britain. The path of the Ignilled Way, or Icknield Street, follows the same path that King Belinus drew along the axis of southern Britain. Not a lot of people know this, but the St Michael ley line is largely one and the same as the Icknield Way. The Pudding Stone track, which incidentally goes back 8,500 years ago, it was believed to have been constructed by the Tardinesian element of the Mesolithic culture who migrated from Africa through Spain, arriving in southeast Britain about 6,500 BC. Pudding stones are natural boulders of conglomerate material and formed by the grinding action of Ice Age glaciers. These pudding stones, they look like traditional spotted dick puddings, attracted a great deal of symbolic attention, becoming known as mother stones and were venerated as sacred to the mother goddess. They've been referred to as breeding stones and growing stones, and they're now more commonly found as monoliths in churchyards or in the foundations of walls. Indeed, the very term foundation stones relates to this practice of building churches on top of other stones, commonly the ancient pagan stone of the time. And the foundation stone was the symbol of the ancient mark stone which originally founded the site. The conglomerate track, as Rudge called it, discovered it in 1925, is now referred to as a pudding stone track, and it's over 200 miles in length. And dotted along its course are the 125 stones that he discovered. Some small enough to be lifted, others up to 6 feet in length. And in places these were 5 to a mile, others were as many as 8 miles apart. The Pedder's Way, more consistently recorded as terminating at Netterhill Heath, some distance northeast, roughly about 6 miles from Sevenhills at the north, is known to have alternative connections continuing further in a southerly direction. It's about 45 to 50 miles in length in its northwest section, stretching across East Anglia before it reaches the North Norfolk coast, and travels eastwards, totaling about 93 miles. It's approximately 2.5 feet thick and in parts as much as 45 feet wide, made of flints rammed into the ground and topped with gravel. The Pedder's Way runs from Colchester to Holme next to Sea. The fairly recent discovery of Seahenge at Holme next to Sea is an obvious clue to the way's original age and ritual purpose, making it far more significant than just a Roman road laid out at the time of the Iceni Rebellion in 61 AD. I found this map on a day when I'd gone to go and see my granddad, who I hadn't seen for years, and he turned round and said, "So what have you been doing today then?" And I thought, I can't even begin to explain. I said, "Well, I've been to the records office. I was just trying to find out about this woodland there. Sevenhills." He said, "Sevenhills?" He said, "I lived in one of those cottages there for 25 years, and your great auntie managed the woodland." It wasn't false memory syndrome, because his own daughter, my mother, never knew. So yeah, on one of those very days when I was questioning the very validity of what I was doing, I came across this map in the records office, 1629 by Thomas Waterman. It clearly shows the Pedder's Way running east to west through the very middle of the woodland at Sevenhills. This part of the recorded way is now called Sevenhills Lane, a continuation of Green Lane. Archaeologists often talk about context, the interrelationships between things which add power, given them meaning. For things only make sense in terms of the way they relate to other things. I'm nearly done. It's just about sort of like coming to an end. We live amongst a complex matrix of oscillating fields within which life has evolved over many epochs. Minute fluctuations in one interlocked field has cosmic ramifications upon many others. Many times per second, the pulses of these fields circumnavigate the globe between our planet's surface and the ionosphere, sending coordinating signals to all organisms. These signals connect us to the global electrostatic field, the Schumann resonance, which has been described as the orchestrating pulse of life on our planet. This standing wave is continually recharged like the tolling of a bell by the roughly 100 lightning bolts that occur each second in the approximately 2,000 thunderstorms worldwide, contributing to the energy in the 7.5 hertz portion of the spectrum. And it was the resonant properties of this global spherical capacitor that Schumann predicted in 1952. ELF wavelengths are vast in length and approximate the circumference of the Earth, and no doubt linked to the geometry of landscape temples. Energy, the frequency near 7.5 hertz would have a wavelength of about 48,000 kilometers. Like it or not, we cannot resist the call to dance of this cosmic drummer, who beats out the rhythm and tempo for our health and well-being. Schumann's fundamental frequency is very close to Earth's circumference harmonic. An absence of these geomagnetic rhythms on the self can lead to an increase in fragmented behaviours, chaotic physiological rhythms, evidenced by early astronauts who suffered such effects until SR generators were installed inside their spacecrafts. Brain synchronization with the Schumann resonance facilitates psi therapeutic entrainment, and these alpha frequencies have been known to reactivate stored healing processes, enhance growth, accelerate immune response, and generally jumpstart these functions in the body's tissues via the rebalancing of its energies. The Earth also exudes natural radiation in response to the various spectra of incoming light, and is itself essentially crystalline in nature, as is all matter, including the human body. The cells of all living organisms, it is now understood, generate a certain amount of self-luminosity underpinning this crystalline view of organic structures. Bodily fluids also have crystal qualities. The water molecule contains in itself the potential forms of all crystals, and its primary form, a tetrahedron. Water can bring all different forms of ions into crystalline state and hold them in a solution. Take our own blood, for example, and how it separates into blood plasma as it forms a healing lattice constructed out of iron crystals which turn blood red outside the body and crystallise over the wound, forming a protective shell. Elkington, In the Name of the Gods, he published in 2001, explores further this idea of energy transference and considers the piezoelectric properties of crystals within bones, teeth, cartilage, which shapeshift in a similar physiological manner. The Earth is a spherical receiver of cosmic energy, evolutionary intelligence, which directs our biological process and spiritual evolutionary unfoldment. The Earth re-radiates the cosmic information it receives from its core outward in complex long-wave signals. We receive these signals via our spinal columns and cranial structures. The cranial cavity, the capstone to this antenna, captures this information and refocuses it to the pineal gland, a neuroendocrine transducer in the centre of the brain, where it is then transmitted via the hypothalamus as signals that direct the pituitary gland, the master control centre of the brain. Recent research is indicating that the brain and nervous system are acting together in a similar manner to that of a sensory organ for our extended magnetic self, with a length scale equal to that of the Earth's diameter. There's a consistent connection demonstrated between frequency, wavelength, and energy transference, all intrinsically linked and governed by the mass and geometry of our great planet and how we interface with it. I hope what you've just heard, because I'm pretty finished, I hope what you've heard works on many levels, even if you don't buy the whole heptagon idea. What remains at the end of it all is still the wonderful locations themselves, which they're, with their rich history and faint traces intact. And it would be great if I thought that at least one person from this room would go and touch base with some of these places, because the sites mentioned still retain that ability to evoke that sense of awe that modern day living can so easily obliterate, connecting with something other. And so if we, like the great religions of our time, could reconnect with the nature religion of our ancestors, then a momentous spiritual revitalization could occur. The natural world and the divine world could be recognized as one and the same again via a kind of remembering. Like Odin, the shaman god, drinking from the well of remembrance situated at the root of the great world tree, from which he gained ancestral and evolutionary knowledge of the origins of things, the value of such remembering for the present and the future. The Sevenhills star parallels the hermetic iconography of the pole star by acting as the gate of heaven and hub of the cosmos. Its geometry is closely bound to the circumference of the Earth, to the wavelength of those frequencies which circumnavigate it, acting as a focal point from which we can reconnect, reconfigure with the infinity within ourselves. This, for me, is the message to be read in the Suffolk landscape, coming from the Sevenhills star.